there's one part of this entire Easter season which I think is really, I mean, if you go to church, or if you don't go to church, or if you celebrate Easter or whatever, if you hear this story, and I think people know it, it really is fascinating what the correlation is to today's day and age, to what's going on here in our very own country. And it's the story of Pontius Pilate. And Pontius Pilate could be probably, if you think about it, the most famous political figure in history. Because, Donald Trump, everybody knows Donald Trump, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Adolf Hitler, they're all political figures that people know by name. But Pontius Pilate, I mean, everybody knows the name. You may not know who he is or exactly what he did, but if you go to church, if you're a Catholic, if you're a Christian, if you're a Jew, you know the name Pontius Pilate. He's the guy that sentenced Jesus to death. And when you listen to the story, or you read the Passion or whatever, and you think about what's going on, I'm fascinated by this guy because he reminds me really of a lot of modern day politicians. And not a lot is known about him before he comes to power. He's kind of a boring guy. He wasn't really militaristic. He wasn't really a tyrant. He was just kind of like ho-hum. And somehow or other, he becomes governor of Judea. And again, doesn't really do anything. He's not really controversial, not a controversial character whatsoever. You may never have known this guy if it weren't for Jesus Christ being brought to him and everybody saying, hey, you have to crucify this guy. He thinks he's king of the Jews. And when you read the story and when you listen to it, here's Pontius Pilate. He's in charge. He's the governor. And back then, the governor was also the judge, and the governor was the jury. And what the governor said, it came straight from the emperor. Emperor Tiberius to Pontius Pilate to, that's it. You better do what he says, or everybody's in trouble. And here's Pontius Pilate, and he's looking at Jesus, and he goes, I'm not really sure why we need to crucify this guy. What has he done? And they're like, he says he's the king of the Jews. He's this, he's that. He's a blasphemer. He was actually charged with sedition. And sedition is basically causing an uprising. Sedition is basically insurrection, which, where have we heard that term recently? It's still around today. So Jesus Christ is charged with sedition. Pontius Pilate looks over the evidence, says, I don't see it, guys. I don't get it. I don't think this guy is guilty. But what happens? What happens? The crowd goes crazy. The crowd is like, crucify him, crucify him. He did it. And Pontius Pilate's like, why do you think he did it? Like, which we just do. And so Pontius Pilate, who also apparently, this is the kind of guy he was, every Passover, he would take one prisoner, he would take a couple prisoners, he'd do this little game show thing where he's like, you can release one prisoner. Do you want prisoner number one or prisoner number two? And this time around, prisoner number one was this guy Barabbas, who actually was a criminal. He murdered people, he led a riot, he was trying to overthrow the emperor, and he was in prison. And he goes, you can have Barabbas, or we can release to you on this Passover Jesus Christ, the self-proclaimed king of the Jews. Who do you want? And the crowd's like screaming for Barabbas. Let him free, crucify this guy. And Pontius Pilate doesn't get it. He doesn't understand. He's like, this guy's guilty. This guy did something. And you want him to go free? This guy, you have no evidence that this guy created or caused sedition or is guilty of any crime. And you want him to be crucified? They're like, yeah. And they start chanting and cheering, and they start getting into this frothy, riotous. Pontius Pilate, I imagine, is fearful for his life. So he says, okay, take Jesus, put him on the cross, stick him with the spear, let him roast in the sun until he's dead. Are you guys happy? And even in the Bible, you see it. It says in Mark 15, it says, intent on satisfying the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas for them. And having Jesus flogged, he handed him over to be crucified. The first part of that sentence is the part that struck me. Intent on satisfying the crowd. Because how many times do we see this happen today? Barabbas, who's guilty, gets set free, no charges, nothing wrong. Jesus didn't really do anything. Maybe people thought he was acting a little crazy. Maybe they thought he was a little uppity. Maybe they didn't agree with what he was saying. Maybe they didn't agree with his philosophy or ideology. They want him dead. And Pilate saying, I don't think that's a good idea, but I don't want you guys coming in here and attacking me. I don't want you screaming and yelling outside my house. I don't want you coming to my place of business and trying to burn it down or spray painting it with graffiti or throwing pipe bombs or bricks through the window. I don't want any of that. I want you to go home. So I will give in to the crowd, intent On satisfying the crowd, the Bible says, Pilate released Barabbas for them and handed Jesus over to be crucified. This is what's happening right now. This is no justice, no peace in ancient Jerusalem. This is the crowd taking control and the politicians giving in. And what happens? What happened back then? Well, the King of God was crucified. It's pretty bad. What happens now? Well, the police are defunded. That's pretty bad. The whole cities are burned and destroyed. That's bad too. People they lose respect for everybody. People are killed and murdered in the street. Look at what happened with Donald Trump. And I'm not comparing Donald Trump to Jesus Christ. However, Donald Trump was put forward in front of the people not once, not twice, for sedition, for insurrection, for treason, whatever you want to call it. It was the same thing. It was the same thing. He'd done nothing wrong. There was no proof of any of it. You had people, much like Pontius Pilate, up there saying, you know what? We don't have any proof, but people don't like the guy. They hate his tweets. They hate what he stands for. They hate what he says at his rallies. They hate that he's got these strange ideas. They hate that he says he's the greatest president of all time. And they hate that he thinks America is the greatest country in the world. We got to get rid of him. We gotta crucify him. You know what we have to do? We have to impeach him. Get rid of him. They gave in to the crowd, and they're still doing it today. And if this story happened, you know what would happen today? You'd have the crowd with bullhorns going, let me turn on my bullhorn because I like you. You'd have crowds going, no justice, no peace till Barabbas is released. That's exactly what would be happening. So when you look at it, it's amazing because this was 2,000 years ago? A politician gave into an angry crowd of people. And that set forth, it changed the world for 2,000 years. Think about what happens today when a politician who you may have never heard of, you may know nothing about, a politician who's not a tyrant, who's not angry, who's never done anything terrible. Think about what happens when one politician, instead of standing up for what's right or doing what they know is right, just gives into the crowd because they're scared. Look what it did to Jesus. Imagine what that could have been you standing up there.